For Session Update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. DFL members of the Senate Transportation Committee, along with Majority Leader Bach, gave a press conference on the importance of passing a long-range transportation solution for the challenges facing Minnesota's road and transit systems. Here's that press conference in its entirety.
I did want to open just by remembering for a moment a good friend, an amazing leader, an amazing public servant, Martin Sabo, who we lost yesterday. He was my constituent and, of course, a mentor to many of us and just a role model of diligence and good stewardship and public service. If I can indulge for just 1 second, a couple of memories. One is what people may not remember is he was really fundamental and key back in his time at the state legislature and really reforming the openness and the accountability, transparency of this state legislature and state legislatures across the country, really bringing state governance back into relevance. It's an interesting story. He worked at the national level. If you haven't read Tom Berg's account of that in his book, I commend that book to you. And I was reminded this morning when listening on the radio that he was talking about income inequality before it was fashionable, and he had a significant proposal, which I hope at some point does see the light of day, in which CEOs who are paid exorbitant amounts at the highest level of corporations, pegged against those who are paid at the lowest level, those incomes shouldn't necessarily be taken as a tax write-off to the full extent that it is, and really talking about the growing stratification of income in this country, which we now see manifesting itself in not so pleasant ways in this current presidential campaign. So Martin Sabo was an extraordinary servant, and we miss him, and we'll hopefully carry on his spirit as we come to a successful conclusion in this legislative session. And on that note, the time is long past for Minnesota to make a renewed investment in its transportation. And thanks to the foresight and hard work of our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and people like Martin Sabo, generations who worked so hard to make Minnesota such a standout among the states, we have an unusually good, robust, and large roadway transportation system, which is great. And I think it has a lot to do with why Minnesota's economy is so strong and resilient. But our generation is not keeping that tradition. Our state and local roads and bridges are in a state of decline and disrepair, and we're falling behind on being able to even maintain them. Transit service is already totally inadequate, both here and across the state. Buses are jammed full, people don't have good connections to where they need to go. There will be even more pressure on our roads, bridges, and transit service because our state is going to grow to over 6 million people in the coming years. Businesses are going to expand. People will need to be able to get to those jobs. Goods and services will need to be able to get to the markets. Ensuring that Minnesota citizens are mobile and have access to the things we all need to do every day is simply one of the most basic, fundamental public services, one of the very core functions of our government. Compounding the increasing pressure on our roads and transit infrastructure is the fact that our existing ways to pay for them are not keeping up with inflation. The traditional per-gallon tax has lost ground. Fuel efficiency and the fact that people are driving less also impacts our ability to pay for what we need. License tab fees have lost ground because cars are lasting longer, and federal support, even with the recent reauthorization of the surface transportation bill, has been unreliable and pretty much flat. But I'm optimistic. This is not complicated. I have a great partner in my counterpart in the House, Representative Tim Kelly, and we've already agreed to a few key principles. So we can get this done. Those principles are that it be an adequate bill, putting together a proposal that actually makes progress on our challenges, that is sustainable and long-term, making sure we have a reliable funding source to avoid the volatility that would create peaks and valleys in planning and building key transit infrastructure and transportation infrastructure, and that is comprehensive, making sure we're not pitting Minnesotans against each other, we're being fair to everyone who lives here, we're not choosing winners and losers. Enhance safety, economic efficiency and development, competitiveness and job growth, fairness and equity, shared prosperity, quality of life, strategic investments, choice, options, balancing the market and public roles, cost sharing, flexibility and responsiveness, building and maintaining transportation systems. They all can be achieved particularly, of course, with the Senate's proposal, but we're open to all ideas and in a posture of compromise. We get there by putting additional dollars into the fund that goes for state highways, county and city roads via the gas tag and license tab fees, some additional resources to those local roads via auto titling fees, provide an adequate and growing source for Greater Minnesota Transit, coming up to par with other metro areas in the sales tax for transit, and gaining efficiency through project delivery and finance innovations. And just a word about transit, because we hear a lot about that from the speaker. We cannot accommodate everyone who's going to come here if we're just going to rely on roads. And it is way more efficient to move people on transit. It saves on roads, parking, and private auto costs. It saves the environment. It helps us conserve our land. It helps us build communities that function well for all people. It allows us to build biking and pedestrian alternatives for those who need that. It gives the elderly and young greater options. It is a path out of poverty for those trapped geographically and economically. And it is far from controversial. It is strongly supported by almost everyone. And it is a good deal for Greater Minnesota. Building fewer roads in the metro area, not asking for anyone else's help. We're going to build this transit system through taxes only in the metro area, combined with the subsidy that we provide out of the metro area for the county state aid highway system. Every Greater Minnesota legislator should be clamoring to support a bill that's crafted much like the Senate bill. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and we have members of my transportation team who have done incredible work representing all parts of the state. We'll start with Senator Vicki Jensen.
Thank you. Since the first day I came to office in 2013, I've participated in all kinds of conversations about the condition of our transportation system. The very first day we introduced ourselves on the Senate floor, I told my colleagues then that you're going to get tired of hearing me talk about the funding that's needed for Highway 14, which is in my district. And although I think I've reached that point already with them, I'm not going to stop fighting for that project until it's done. The problem is that there are projects across this state that every single legislator, the ones here and everyone in the legislature, has a particular project that they're fighting for in their district. And we know that because there are over 600 projects that are currently in consideration for corridors of commerce money. Few areas of policy are as critical to our long-term economic health and as significant in our impact to our quality of life as transportation. We're facing two overarching challenges, I believe. Funding, which we have been talking about with each other, and I'm optimistic we can figure out what we're going to do there. But we also have to look at a system that is not just project by project based. It cannot be geographically based. No matter where you live in Minnesota or the station you are in your life, everyone benefits from a safe, robust transportation system. We need to understand the challenges that each area is facing and the methods that they are choosing to solve those challenges. Larger, more populated communities are facing roadway, bridge deterioration, traffic safety concerns, inadequate transit service, and growing congestion. Smaller, less populated communities are facing roadway and bridge deterioration, traffic safety concerns, and inadequate transit services. Transportation systems like light rail and transit are critical lifelines to the thousands of residents that live in Minnesota who need to get to their jobs, to medical services, to school and other important destinations. Without public transit service in rural communities, the state would face higher and increased human services costs. Isolation will grow. We rely on our families and friends to take us, to get us where we need to go. If we want people to remain in our rural communities, in their homes, maintaining their independence and quality of life, we must invest in Greater Minnesota Transit as well. We have an emphasis on fiscal responsibility, but that doesn't mean we should slow down the investments that we need to make in transportation. In fact, the investments are more important than ever right now. We pay for road improvements and are paying for road improvements, whether it's at the gas pump, in higher property taxes, or in the repairs that we do pay for damages to our vehicles. Right now, today, we've created some disparity because state by state, county by county, we're approving sales tax increases. Those disparities must be part of the conversation as well. It's not just about math. We've talked about the math equation. We've talked about that this has to be an art, the art of compromise. But it's not just about that. It's much, much more and much bigger than that. It's about how we want to live our lives right now and what we leave for the next generation. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Senator Susan Kent, and thank you for being here, and I'm glad to be here to talk again about transportation. As Senator Jensen said, this has been a topic for all of us for a number of years, and it is so urgent that we work hard on this and see if we can reach some sort of conclusion and solution this session. I want to expand on a few points that have been made already this morning. First of all, it has to do, I'm going to go back to the math. When you think about what it costs Minnesotans, just in direct costs today, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the average Minnesotan spends $400 a year extra in operating and maintaining their cars because of the poor conditions of our roads. Those are just the immediate costs. Then we look at what are the more, the less easy to quantify costs, like the time spent in traffic, the wasted productivity that businesses face and that we face as individuals. And then you think about the long-term missed opportunities in terms of attracting people to our regions and our communities, to Minnesota, businesses and their development. When you think about transit, for example, we know in my community in the East Metro that businesses have walked away from our opportunities because there was not meaningful transit in our community. That is why the business community in the East Metro strongly supports the Gateway Corridor or Gold Line, because they know what that means for our region's future. I would also, in talking about Gateway, mention that a lot of people think of that as a commuter line. We're going to bring suburbanites into the metro area. But it's much more than that. There are people in St. Paul who desperately need jobs, and we have jobs that are unfilled just a few miles east in Washington County. And a connection like Gateway works for everybody involved, and it's important. The last thing I want to say is, as a mom, Senator Dibble rightly referenced that our parents and our grandparents made the sacrifices, put in the effort to build the system that we have today. There is no other area in my life in which I run up a tab and expect my kid to pay it off. And I feel the same way about our infrastructure. We need to step up and take care of this important part of our state so that our kids and our grandkids are not left paying a bill that just gets more expensive the longer we let this wait. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Melissa Franzen. I represent Senate District 49, and I think much of the discussion has already been rightly summarized by my colleagues. I'd like to just mention a few examples of what we're talking about. Instead of going through more talking points, I have two bills in front of me on the same issue, on 494 and 35W interchange. One is a bonding bill, one is a one-time money funding request. It doesn't matter how we get it done, but we need to get it done. This bill only asks for $85 million of our funding to repair what has been described as the 17th most congested bottleneck in the entire country, and we have that in our backyard. I actually don't represent this part of Bloomington, but I do represent Bloomington, and it's about really talking about our region, really emphasizing that this is not about metro, suburban, rural Minnesota. This is about one Minnesota, and we have these types of projects all across our state. We have bridges that are falling apart. You've heard the talking points. It's time that we do something about it. I also want to mention Southwest Light Rail as well. It's sometimes something that we continue to talk about, but we need to fund it. It's our opportunity to leverage federal dollars here. Our mayors across the line in the western suburbs are clamoring for this project to be built. The chambers of commerce that represent these areas are also signing letters and resolutions to support this project. So it's not about one area versus the other. It's about continuing to build the system that we need so desperately in Minnesota for transportation needs. Not everybody uses roads and bridges. Some people also cannot drive, so they rely on transit options. And we need to continue this to be a competitive state with other states and leveraging those federal dollars. So we can all agree on the issue, on the problem. Let's finally agree on a bipartisan solution. Thank you.
Two points. First, I guess I was kind of looking over their shoulders at the talking points of my colleagues who did such a very articulate job of laying out the problem, and it reminded me that the font would have had to been much larger if I was going to deliver any of that. My age is showing, I guess. You know, I just want to say the sun peeked through this morning on the Iron Range. And Cliffs Natural Resources announced they're going to reopen North Shore Mine. It is a big deal. Big deal. So they're going to, I talked to them yesterday, they're going to start calling people back in what they described as waves to kind of get the plant ready to start making pellets again in May. So for all those people on the range whose lives have been radically changed over the last few months and all the uncertainty over them, I'm certainly pretty pleased about that. On transportation, there's some good news. You know, the speaker and I have been on this speaking circuit, traveling to every kind of group you can imagine to talk about our priorities for the session. And I think the good news is over and over and over, the speaker has acknowledged that we have a $600 million problem per year for the next 10 years. The majority leader, actually, at an event I was at recently with her, described it as a $700 million problem each year over the next 10 years. So I think that's the really good news. I think we're at a place where we now all recognize and agree we have a problem. We even agree on a number. So now it's just a math and figure out how to get to what we all agree on. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I'm looking forward, we put the conference committee back into place on Thursday, and I'm looking forward to that deliberation and trying to find a solution to a problem we now all agree on. And then the second thing I want to say is on the Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, I moved my mother out of her home into a senior apartment building. And I can tell you, transit is just not a metro issue. In the little town of Cook, we've got 48 senior citizen apartments. I actually worked on the construction on both of them. And so and my mother no longer has a driver's license. Our regional center, Virginia, is about 25 miles away. So one of the first calls I made after I moved her in there was to the Arrowhead Economic Opportunity Agency, the AEOA, who do our transit in the Arrowhead region. And I asked Jack, who runs that program, I said, Jack, I said, what kind of bus service do we have to Virginia, our regional center? What he said? None. Now, shouldn't somebody like my mother, who's a senior, and much of rural Minnesota are seniors, shouldn't they be able to get on a bus and maybe go get an appointment for a hearing aid, which my mother badly yesterday again communicated to me I have to get a hearing aid? Well, we don't do appointments like that in the little town of Cook. So they're just, and we don't sell a lot of things in little towns that regional centers do. We have no clothing store any longer. So there just are a lot of things that aren't available in small towns anymore. And seniors, especially seniors, still need to be able to access the larger regional centers when they need things they can't buy in their little towns. So I don't want anybody to think this is just a metro issue, because it isn't. And let me just say on transportation, or first on transit. You know, 2011, the Senate and House Republican legislature passed into law a 1/2 cent sales tax, authorized counties to put a 1/2 cent sales tax on for transportation. A Republican legislature did that. 1/2 cent, and about 20 counties or a little more have actually done that. So if in 2011 you were willing to give counties the authority to raise the sales tax for roads and bridges, why is it so objectionable to give counties the authority to raise the sales tax in the metro area for transit? It's the same thing. If it wasn't a tax increase in 2011, why is it now a tax increase in 2016? I don't understand that. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. This is really, really critical infrastructure, and I really don't want to just try and put some kind of Band-Aid on it with a little surplus money. We all agree on what the challenges are going forward. Let's roll up our sleeves and try to tackle the problem that we all agree exists.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming to hear this. I just want to add a couple of minor points that maybe could be lost if we don't bring them up. And one is the regressiveness of any tax that taxes transportation for roads and bridges. Now, one of the things that we have to always keep in mind is that the regressiveness is because people aren't accessing, aren't using roads and bridges. They might be using transit. And that's how a balanced solution here that provides transit can make a balance and take that edge off of the regressiveness of a, for instance, of gas tax or of other taxes where people are not taxed on their vehicles. Another thing is that not every solution is appropriate for every location. I'm from Dakota County. We have a very robust bus system, and in fact in Eagan it's called the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority, and I have actually given them some money, the Suburban Transit Authority, to do some suburb to suburb routes, and that's actually in process now. It's low ridership, but it's going to pick up. As the bus driver told the folks in the Star Tribune, this takes a little while. Not everyone knows about it instantly. So it is something that's going to grow. And in Dakota County, some of our transit, or let's say a lot of our transit, because we don't have any rails out there, we have BRT, Bus Rapid Transit. So our BRT goes on roads. So our transit needs are also road needs. And so our county has the extreme southern part of it is all rural and has different transit needs. And the northern part is quite heavily populated. And so there we need the roads, we need the speed, we need the access. And of course, everyone says that one thing you don't do is put your job on the other side of a river, and we have a river that separates us from a lot of jobs. So we need ways to get across that river. I go across it every day to come here to the Senate, and it's often a big slowdown. It's often a slowdown that goes miles south of the river. So there's a lot of capacity that we need to work on, and that capacity can be addressed in many ways. So I appreciate you coming. And thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Well, I also want to acknowledge the presence of Ann Rest, who serves on the Transportation Committee and also does fine work on the Tax Committee. All right, that's her comment. Write it down. And of course, Rod Scoy, who served for a long time on the Transportation Committee, but now chairs our Tax Committee. And at the end of the day, of course, transportation bill is a tax bill. I mean, it might be in the tax bill, but it is essentially, even if it travels separately, a tax bill. So we're ready for questions.
So either chairman or leader, where's this going to go? Chairman, you've said you and Kelly could get an agreement within an hour.
Right.
So where are you going to go? How are you going to get this agreement? What's it going to look like? You don't have much time, so start answering the questions.
Right,
now.
yeah. Always they want us to negotiate in public. No.
Or at least negotiate.
Yeah, we're negotiating. It's happening. We're having those conversations. We've been talking fairly intensively, and that's why I can say with confidence that Chair Kelly supports the values and principles that I articulated. That it's adequate, that it's sustainable, long-term, and that it's comprehensive. That's a pretty big deal because we haven't always been in that same space with House and leadership in the House. And so, as Majority Leader Bach said, then it becomes just a question of kind of math and sources and details, and they pay us a lot of money to figure out that stuff. So that's our job. That's what we do in politics. We try to create possibilities. We try to compromise and try to find what works on both sides. Probably have to give up a little bit on both sides, and and figure out how we can get there with those basic underlying principles.
Light rail seems to be the most politically charged point in all of this. Is there a bill that the Senate DFL caucus can accept that does not include the state's portion of the Southwest Light Rail?
Oh, yeah, well, it depends on what you mean by the state's portion. I mean, we need to come up with the local source. By local, I mean sources generated within the state. The state's portion, is 10% of the overall, and that's our kind of remaining state effort that we need to provide is $135 million. We can absolutely do that without a state source coming out of the general fund or the capital investments bill, the bonding bill, if we do sales tax in the metro.
Majority Leader, can I follow up on Don's and have you come forward? I guess my question is what's changed other than the fact you're closer to the election? Does that somehow make this easier or harder to do?
Well, I think the challenge is getting the leaders in the House in both caucuses to agree that this needs to be a bipartisan solution. And it's going to require bipartisan vote, a strong bipartisan vote on the floor of the House. It feels a little bit like a stadium, right? It's just never quite going to be popular with the public. But once it's built, people go, wow, is that nice? And I do think that a transportation tax, and actually it's not really fair to call it a tax, it's a user finance system. It's a user finance system. So, and it's probably never going to be popular to take money out of people's pockets and put it there. But what is popular is fixing it. Everyone knows it's broken. And so I guess I just would encourage the House Republicans and House Democrats to put down the sabers. We badly need to have a bipartisan solution here. This bill is not going to pass with only the votes of one caucus over in the House. So I think they need to start thinking about that now. What does that vote look like over in the House? We're going to pass the bill in the Senate. We did it in 13. We did it again in 15. But the House is much more difficult, and I think we all need to acknowledge that. And I think the sooner that, I think the conversation needs to start with the chairs of transportation and the conference committees, but ultimately it needs to rest within the leaders over in the House as to what kind of is the package of votes that come together to get this done. And it may be like a stadium. I mean, in 2011 or 12 when we passed the Viking Stadium, the Republicans controlled the legislature, and the Democrats put up most of the votes to get the Viking Stadium under construction. This may be something like that, but I can't find the path for them, but I think they need to start that conversation about what does the voting board look like on the day they take up the conference committee report on transportation.
Is there a disincentive for House Democrats to hand Republicans this victory?
Victory, we're just trying to fix roads. You know, I don't know that anybody should claim victory. I think it's what the public wants us to do. The polling numbers are pretty big. The public wants the transportation system fixed. I think if we get to a conclusion this year and accomplish what we know the public wants by a wide margin, we all should claim victory on that. And, you know, voting for, and I've said this before, voting for tax increases isn't easy. Anybody can vote no, right? And then go home and pound on your chest that you're not increasing taxes, but the public wants the system fixed, and it's not going to fix itself. It's only going to get more expensive. So it's going to take a lot of courage to put up a green vote for that bill. I also think there'll be no animosity on the part of the public for doing it, because people, as I often say, it'll never be popular, but I think people will say, well, at least it's going to go to roads.
Is this a gas tax? Is this a tax on tabs? Where would this?
The conference committee will figure that out. I don't know what that looks like. There's 3 pieces of revenue, I guess, for the 3 predominant pieces that go into the Highway User Trust Fund. It's tabs, it's the motor, you notice the sales tax on cars, we don't even call it a sales tax. To my point of it being a user fee system, it's the motor vehicle excise tax. We didn't even call it a sales tax on cars. So you got tabs, you got the motor vehicle excise tax, and you got the gas tax, are the three pieces. I don't know what the conference committee is going to come up with, but it seems like when you got a number of different options to create a blended solution on, that there ought to be a path.
Can you put a number? I mean, I know you're still throwing around numbers, but can you put around a number on right now that would work for you guys if we are talking gas?
Yeah, between $400 and $600 going to state highways. And then probably a little bit more so that we're sure enough money is coming out in the formula to support county and municipal state agencies. So I think at a minimum we need to be putting in $600 million more per year. And out of that, it doesn't quite get us to the 600 we need just for the trunk highway system, but it allows us at least to get on a 10-year path. With maybe we get ahead of the game by authorizing some additional trunk highway bonds in the state highway system. Then we need to be sure that we're looking at, we don't even come close, and even the Transportation Finance Advisory Committee proposal, what they propose to do doesn't come close on what we need for municipal state aid and county state aid highways, much less what counties and cities need to do for their own local roads. But at least we start getting into the ballpark for those local systems. Remember that almost 90% of the mileage in our state is owned by local jurisdictions. Now, the 10% that's owned by the state system carries 80% of the traffic, but in terms of just pavement and mileage, we have to keep the state-local partnership strong as well.
Senator, how soon will the conference committee meet, and are you prepared to make any opening concessions from the 2015?
Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Talking over the next few days. It's a House file, of course, and so the first meeting is called by the House, by Chair Kelly, and I think they were talking about yet this week, but he and I need to chat first to see what we do with our first meeting.
Do you need to increase revenue from tabs, the excise tax or gas tax or some combination? You have to increase those. There's no other way in your mind to get the money.
Oh, no, there's the House proposal, of course, to take from the existing general fund. Hopefully, it would hopefully be on a permanent basis out of motor vehicle parts. And there's also some talk about motor vehicle repairs, but that would be something new. No. But the other thing is, that takes from the general fund. So we really have to do a pretty sharp analysis about whether or not we have space in the general fund, given all the other general fund priorities. So,
bottom line, you have to increase at least one of those three.
We cannot do this job with existing revenues. That is an absolute objective fact.
Senator Bach, one more follow-up on the votes. You were talking green votes. I know a few people here are from very competitive districts. Are you confident that all of them can put a green vote up on this again if need be and go back to their districts and win?
Well, the literature's already been written, right? I mean, this isn't going to write any new literature. I mean, the Senate took that vote in 2013, and I cautioned them about doing that, but we did it, and we did it again in 15. So I mean, the literature on the gas tax is already written. So I don't believe there's any political risk in the Senate for new revenue to the Highway Trust Fund. In fact, there's way more risk if we do nothing. You took the vote for nothing. I guess if we're going to take a tough vote, you should get something. So I think there's more risk to the Senate by not getting something than what we've already done.
Okay. Chairman, the legislative auditor this morning is critical of MnDOT for how it picks projects, especially corridor of commerce projects. Can you respond? Do you agree? Do you think, are you going to propose some law changes? How do you react?
Senator Jensen looks ready to pounce to the microphones, but so I'll relinquish. So I got a very high-level briefing on the report and we're going to have a full hearing on it this afternoon jointly with the House, as a matter of fact. And so I'll be prepared to say more about if we should and how we should respond. But suffice it to say that I'm glad we did this analysis kind of at the leadership and the behest of the Senate Transportation Committee, and I think the House was equally as interested, because our goal is to not get into the business of picking and choosing individual and specific projects I think Senator Jensen articulated that very clearly. We need to build a program for transportation and then trust the objectivity of the analysis to really support the highest priority needs around the state, whether that's responding to safety and rehabilitation needs or adding additional capacity so we're addressing economic opportunities. And we need to be able to, in order to resist the urge to turn the transportation bill into something akin to the bonding bill, and then if that were to happen, then the only roads that would ever get built in the state would be the roads where there are districts with a ton of political power or leverage over kind of the larger political context in which we find ourselves at that moment. And so, I don't know that it was overly critical, but it definitely points us towards some ability to improve the objectivity of this project selection process. We want it to be both transparent and obvious why projects are being selected, while at the same time being objective and not subject to undue influence and pressure that would lead to bad decisions. So, I'm glad for the report, and we may respond with some policies, or we may just say, hey, MnDOT, how are you going to respond and improve your ways? I just don't know yet. All right.
Any more questions for this topic?
All right. Well, thank you very much.